that burnout really took me 10 months to completely recover. I had to hand over my business to someone to look after it, and then I just slept for 10 months. Usually it's when people hit the 35 to 45 that something shows up. And this is where I see a lot of people realizing that, is this how I'm supposed to feel? Am I supposed to feel this drained every day? We started to look into how have we gotten to this place today, which took us actually 400 years back in time from René Descartes, which was an old philosopher. He is the reason for our fragmentation approach that we have in medicine, in being human, in everything. This is what we do in medicine. We look at the symptom, we fix that, but we don't understand the root cause. We don't understand the psychological approach on that as well. People don't really understand that nutrition is basically our medicine. Those nutrients are required to release the neurochemicals.
Well, good morning there, Dorthe Hummel. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Ridiculously Human podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to it.
Yeah, I'm honestly I think I started following you maybe like a month or so ago on LinkedIn, and the stuff you started writing about, and I was just like everything, I don't know, it's the way you write or the way you explain it, but I just had this aha moment, and I'm like, yes, of course, she's so right. Everything begins with your biology, right? And we're gonna delve more into that in the conversation. So I coach guys, and it got me so it's had me thinking differently. Like for the last few weeks, I'm like, normally I would go, okay, cool, maybe we should do this or that, and then I'm thinking, no, hang on, actually, maybe it's your biology, So I obviously want to find out in this chat how I can go that layer deeper with these guys too, and find out that sort of stuff, because it's so, it's like I said, it's so obvious to me now, and I think you can help people so much more when you actually treat the right thing. So look, I'm always really interested in how people became who they became and what they became interested in. And you effectively a high performance coach, right? And I gather, and I'm making an assumption here, that you were always kind of a high performing person yourself, because it sounded like you were into kind of elite gymnastics as a youngster. And then you also were, quite a sort of advanced runner. So yeah, has it always been in your sort of blood to sort of, enjoy high performance sort of stuff?
Absolutely. Besides being a typical type A, I think it's probably runs in my biology that I like high pace, I like efficiency, I like those type of things, no matter where I'm at. And just to be clear for the audience, I've never actually been at any elite level in my sport. I've always, though, in my younger age, I was a competitive gymnast, sorry. So, but the thing is that you kind of retire when you're 17, 18, which I then did. So it wasn't like I had a long career on it, but the amount of training was very enormous in an early age, from 5 to when I retired for that, which I obviously loved. And people on my street, my kids and everything, not my kids, the kids that I was playing with, was always joking a little bit, because I didn't walk from one destination to another. I always ran. So it was I just always been in a high pace. And the reason I think I started my whole journey on where I'm at today was actually already when I was 17, 18, after a year on high school in America. And that was ending my day. It wasn't like I was living particularly healthy or anything. But then again, like a normal Danish sort of healthy diet from as a kid. And then I went into the American typical diet. So that was the complete opposite. And then I did no sport at all. I didn't even go for a walk. I had no exercise at all. And then I was just, partying a lot, because I was in a high school now. So suddenly that was another world for me as well. And when I came back, I just felt like my body was almost like a 90-year-old. That's how I felt. I couldn't think straight. Obviously, I gained some weight, but I was probably in a need for something. But it wasn't a healthy weight. Let's just put it that way. So everything was just not feeling well. I couldn't think straight again. I had acne, I had constipation. So there was a lot of things that I was starting to wonder, I'm wondering if that nutrition could have done something to my body. So that was a little bit like, okay, so I started to look into that, and that was actually the beginning of my passion in terms of understanding what the body needs of fuel. So I became a nutritionist and helping a lot of people within that qualification you would have as a nutritionist, helping them in health. But the majority of the clients or the people that sought my help was people somehow in sport. It wasn't like professionals or elite at that stage, but it was probably what I came from myself. Those that like to perform at a high level, even though they have full-time jobs and for some reason maybe training just as much as a professional.
Hmm.
And that was when I shifted into the running part. So my passion, first of all, was about to understanding how can you optimize yourself and how does that feel and look like? So that was my curiosity and just passing all that experience and that knowledge on to them. However, the more people in sport that came to me, I felt like I probably needed to have some more information in the actual sporting category. So that was why I added on the functional sports nutrition as well. And in that, I was actually presented to the genetic understanding. This is back in 13. And for me, that was really a penny that dropped because in the science and what we usually customize for anybody, I mean, is in this case, especially athletes, that would be random or not just random, but generalized recommendation, which would be according to the nutrition, in terms of supplementation, in terms of recovery. So everything was a standardized protocol, which was also why I didn't see the same result. And for me, that was a little bit like, I cannot really feel like I'm helping my clients enough. And when I then got to understand the genetics behind it, that was when everything was just clicked for me. Like now it makes sense because we are all individuals. So we come from a different place. And if we don't address it according to that, then we don't get the same results. So I think that was like the starting point. But then when I also hit, because I thought at that time I had like the perfect things lined up for myself, my perfect performance stack, which I see a lot of people have. So they stack all the right things. They got the right nutrition, they got the right supplements, they got the right sleep protocol and exercise and everything. And somehow I had a serious burnout.
Mm.
And that was like perplexed because how could that happen to me? I thought I had it all figured out until I realized I didn't. And at the end of the day, what was really going on was I was way past the stress period. I was way past the mental health part because I was so good at not listening to myself, just pushing myself and thinking I could just optimize with all these things. So that burnout really took me 10 months to completely recover. And I mean, like I had to hand over my business to someone to look after it, and then I just slept for 10 months.
Wow.
Just having the alarm to go water the plant, like I used to say, joking a little bit about it, because I could literally just have slept forever. That's how I felt. So taking care of my kids in the morning, dropping them off at the kindergarten, and then yeah, just to sleep in between that. So that was 10 months of recovery. And that was another door that really opened for me because then I was thinking, okay, I need to revisit my approach to what performance and well-being it really is. Because apparently the mental part, which we like to separate like in a corner, it's flying above us in some way, which I was schooled as well. I really needed to understand what is going on a psychological level that affects the whole physical part.
Hmm.
So that was when I started researching and educating myself in psychology, neurobiology, because again, we can have the psychology as one thing, but what is actually going on in the brain and in the brain part of it, which I like to separate it as, because there's like the brain, there's the mental, and then there's the cognitive part of it. So what is actually going on that can have consequences affected by the biology? So that led me to a lot of coaching certifications, not only, and flow expert and stuff like that. So I was really diving into understanding what is the connection actually between this, and which is also what brought me to where I'm at today. Understanding that what is it actually that most of these people are seeking at the end of the day. well, we might call it a lot of things, we might label it as a lot of things, but at the end of the day, what people are actually looking for is what I call today the coherence model. They're looking for coherence because when everything else clicks, when you feel good, you have the right energy, you sleep well, you don't have constipation or bloated or headache or brain fog, when you're at that state, you perform the best, you feel the best, and you accomplish the best. So over the years, working with these high performers in what have become over the years a lot of professional athletes as well. So my level of achievement in sport as well was also accelerating. So I have athletes in all the top leagues in the world, actually in football, American football, baseball, tennis, besides, of course, amateurs that want to still find out how can I find my best potential in this. And then the other part of my performance audience is obviously people within like normal, regular people who still just wants to have the best out of themselves. And in that case, usually it's when people hit the 35 to 45 that something shows up.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I see a lot of people realizing that, is this how I'm supposed to feel? Am I supposed to feel this drained every day? Am I supposed to have this? Is there even a more better level of me? So that's a lot of people within that, where the model is the same.
And do you think, right, that sort of age range barrier thing, it happens then because of our lifestyles? Or is it another reason? Is it just like, okay, cool, this is what sort of happens in that sort of age range?
Well, I always say that we have a decade that presents different things, which it is actually. So
Yeah.
if you have a certain amount of years behind you by now, you can probably go back and look, this is how I was, my identity, for instance, how I was in my 20s, very ambitious to achieve something, which is usually the foundational things. This could be a title, it could be the material part, like a house, education, kids, and stuff like that. And then when you turn into the 30s, it looks different. So the identity shifts not only from our wisdom, but also from our biology, but also for what we're driven by. And that goes on as well. So usually in the 30s, people have sort of accomplished what they have had an external goal for or achievement for. And suddenly biology starts to look different as well. It's usually just the biology that changes automatically, unless, of course, we are able and know how that looks like if I want to make sure that I maybe postpone that a little bit or even rebalance that a little bit.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And like literally, I swear I can relate to 100%. I think like in
Yeah,
my 20s, I was ruthless, like I
of course.
whatever, like just throw
Of
it at
course.
me, like I'll do whatever, and then I definitely noticed like in the 30s, okay, cool, things changed for me. I was more like, okay, let me just sort of focus a little bit here on like, career and these sort of things. And then, now I'm in my 40s and it's obviously different. And your thinking changes too, like, and this is, I don't know if this sounds a bit weird, but like, I think the older you get, sort of the more you start kind of worrying and stuff like that. So is that just one of these age range things? Is it like the pressure on society, or is it our biology, or is it a combo?
It's probably a combo, of course, because I mean, like the example from my burnout, for instance, and why I always say that our biology dictates our behavior and our identity,
Hmm.
which is a good example when I had my burnout phase, for instance. So I might have come from a place where my self belief, my self identity was probably that like the ruthlessness or just the powerful and all these things that I would normally see myself as. I could just push through and all these things that we tend to have a narrative about ourselves, our own identity. But obviously, when I was completely shut off on anything, I didn't even have energy to go out and get myself a glass of water. So that belief about who I was, my identity was shattered completely. But that was mainly because my biology was in a really bad place. So I wasn't having the access to the things that would give me that support of my identity.
So how did you get out of that? Like, I know you said you did a lot of like research and study, but like, I don't know how much you could have done if you were in bed all day.
Mm,
How,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
how did you get out of it?
Well, it was like I said, it was besides sleeping, because that was all I could. I was having chronic headaches and I had a phobia of people. So I was just like isolating myself, but that was
Wow.
just what worked for me. But I meditated a lot. This was where I really learned the benefit of meditation because I believe that there was so much clutter in my head. I had the nightmares all the time and I felt like I had a highway running in my head and I just couldn't really stop that image. And I was almost living in between two parallel worlds. So sometimes during the day, might have had a nightmare, and I didn't actually know whether that was from my real life or from back then. It was like really horrible. So I needed to kind of stop that speed of thoughts that my brain was processing all the time without because I couldn't understand it anyway.
Hmm.
So I meditated a lot. I tried to be in nature just to ground myself because again, it seemed like the train has run off with me and not, I couldn't actually stop it. So I needed to do some really grounding things in order for me to get back into my own body again. And then when I had the slight energy to get out of it again, that was when I could slowly start to focus on my diet again and be back on not overstimulating anything. On the contrary, what do I need to take out of my diet in order for me to have my nervous system slowly recovering from this? So again, it's about, I obviously back then I didn't know what I know today, but at that point, this was all I could do. And that's also why I see a lot of people when they're in this burnout phase that I don't know if you read that as well, but I'm always when I'm out doing speeches or workshops in companies, there's always one person that sits in the room and he or she is either off leave because of stress. And
Hmm.
they have been in a long period of trying something. Maybe they have a stress coach in the company and they have tried that out and that might have done something, but they're still not, well and ready to go back to work. And then some physical symptoms usually start to show up with neck pain or shoulder pain or stomach pain or whatever. And then they get sent to the physio. And then the physio works on them for X amount of time, and yeah, it's a little bit better. And then somebody recommend maybe you should do some cold plunge. It should be good for this, and maybe you should try a chiropractor. And then they sit in the room because they hope that when I come in, that there's maybe something they haven't heard, or maybe they could try something else. And what I always say to them is, there's nothing wrong with all the good intentions, basically. But if you have a misaligned biology, that you're not looking at the root cause. So
Yeah.
usually when we then start to do all this work and we start at the bottom up, start to find out from an individual level what resonates and what works for you and what is the root cause of this. And suddenly I just see them over a very short period of time actually, where they just like bounce back suddenly because it's again like when you put the things right together, it's not really complicated for the body to find that balance again.
So maybe we can just go like a layer deeper. Like how do you do that then? Like say the person that is stressed out, like because I think it's nice to instead of just talking about say the elite people. I mean this
Mm.
impacts everybody, right?
Oh yeah,
Nobody is performing like probably as well as they could. That's for sure because of
exactly.
yeah, just how we live these days.
Mm.
So like that person that was super stressed out and off, like what would you have done, like, step by step to get them out and to understand what was actually going on?
Well, mostly for no matter who I work with, if it's athletes or in business or just regular people, if you could call it that, I always do a genetic testing to begin with to simply identify what is your unique blueprint. What is it capable of? Where's your potential? But where do you also have some limitation that might actually be the reason why you're completely overloaded with the burnout caused from something in terms of cortisol response, the stress hormone, or is it an inflammation that has caused it? What is it actually? So what I can't see is obviously your current state, but I can tell what your sensitivities. And that's usually the beginning. For those that goes a little bit advanced, I add on another lab test because that's when I can actually look at your gut microbiome. I can look at your neurochemistry, how that is affected as well on this. But usually when I meet someone who's completely burned out in some way, I don't need to confirm that they're burned out. I
Mm.
mean, do we have an either chronic low cortisol production or do we have missing the spikes and the drops? Probably. I mean, if they like, I could do it like that. But usually just by understanding what is that genetic blueprints. I built the nutrition, the supplementation, the recovery plan. And this is obviously where this is just a foundation for my coaching. So my coaching is based on the information, and suddenly we bring things together. So it's not just about the biological data, but it's also the implementation. And that I actually think it's important also to emphasize, because a lot of people, they just think data is enough and then I just follow a plan. But that's the biggest misunderstanding. I obviously use the data, but the data is for me to lean on in what direction would be right for this individual. So what plan, for instance, would work for this one? So we don't just have this narrow thinking about, what's the data saying? And also genetic is not, it's not a destiny. This is just a support thing on how to play the piano well.
I was wondering, so like, what are your thoughts on, because I read another interesting article which almost like challenges a little bit of what you're saying here, and I think it's all relevant, and I've seen you talk about it too. Is like, so, you know, besides your genetics, we obviously have like epigenetics, which is like your environment essentially. You know, like that kind of shapes a lot of like who you are, how healthy you are, you know, et cetera, et cetera. What are your thoughts on like do you take into consideration, okay, cool, this person, this is their genetic blueprint, but actually they're in the, you know, they're not necessarily in their normal environment, or, you know, the environment is toxic and stuff. Do you also then pull that in, that sort of information in? And
absolutely. That's exactly my point. And also, if you want me to just like go shortly through my coherence model, as I call it, because that actually describes this pretty well. So the way that the model is built or customized is that we have the first layer, which is the micro. This is like the hardware. We have the genetics, we have the cells, the things that you're made of. That's like the foundation of the house, so which I call the hardware. And then when we move that up to the next level, we have all the systems. That's the software. And in that could potentially also be the epigenetics, because the epigenetics decides what genes are being turned on or not. So we cannot separate either of those, and we cannot just look at one of these areas. And when we have the systems, that would be the hormone systems, immune system, the central nervous system. The systems is actually how you communicate. This is where you put the genetics into play. And then when we add that on to the next level, which is like the meta level, that's the user. That's the user of the whole computer system. That means our personality, our psychological approach to things. This is our meaning, our purpose, and everything. So this is who we are based on the foundation and what that individual brings into play. And then the fourth and the last layer of this, that's the micro. That's the macro, which is the environment. So that's everything that's going on an external level, affecting everything else. So which one comes first? Obviously starts with the genetics, but it's not like a linear thing, but it's like a constant loop. So you might have something in the environment. So let's say that's probably the place and the problem I see most people today. They have all these tools in the environment that we try to bring in. So that could be mental training tools. It could be sports science tools. It could be schedules on different things. Everything we try to make us fit. And in that case, I always give an example from, let's say that you have a sports club, and someone comes in with the most amazing shoes that they can run probably 10% better. And then they drop off a bunch of shoes for this. But what they had probably forgot was, what about the sizes for this? So everybody tried to fit it down. Maybe it's a little bit too small, maybe it's too big, but they try to get away with it. Eventually, the individuals who doesn't really fit that shoe, they will have some consequences. Maybe they will have blisters, or maybe they will have whatever consequences they could have. But the idea is, obviously, wouldn't it have made more sense to start with the beginning, understand what the size of the foot is, and then put the shoe according to that? And that's the same thing with the environment. I mean, the environment. So when we have a lot of these external things and we just expect them to fit because somebody else might have fitted, or it might have matched at some point, but then again, we don't factor in the individuality. And that again is always about, it starts with who are you based on your genetics, not because again, it's not a destiny, but this is giving us an idea of how the systems operate and how the identity, the meaning, the purpose, psychological, and then what will then be the right thing to do or to implement based on that.
Yeah, I mean, like again, it makes a lot of sense. You know what I mean, and it's super clear. So you would that you would do the different testing, right? That you have the genetic testing, and then what was the second one sort that you said you tested their gut microbiome and stuff like and then it sounds like the top, or at least the top layer, I think they said the macro layer, that's more like, okay, cool, you know, you've got to sort of ask them questions about, you know, who they are and that sort of stuff. So it's like a very sort of comprehensive, like, I guess intense, maybe not intense, but just a very comprehensive sort of analysis of this person. And I mean, it must take a bit of time to do that, you know, and then I guess to start seeing some, maybe you can see results quite quickly because you're like, oh, well, I can see this is what but the whole process might take a bit of time.
Well, I think that's probably one of my strengths, that I have just built the science upon it, is probably that I'm really good at connecting the dots. So when I have the client and I'm hearing their symptoms or their challenges or their mental issues, whatever they might be dealing with, I'm always in my head already, because I've done this so many years, I'm already understanding, maybe this guy, he might have something with his dopamine production, or maybe this one seems like there might be a inflammatory response and stuff like that. So it's not like I can always just, you know, put a finger to it, but it's because it's been such a big thing now that I have been using it so many years. And sometimes I don't really need to do the genetics, obviously, to put these things together. It's just because I have been, the majority of my clients over the years have actually been mainly men, and men like data. So for me, it has been, to begin with, it was a lot about, but this is not what I'm saying. This is what the numbers are saying. So let's just lean on that. And it's not because they didn't believe me, but they just like to have some concrete thing that we can work from. But for me, at least, it's more like I take it in phases. So when, for instance, I work with somebody from this whole thing, it's not like we start on this and we only focus on that. We put things together, but in the right order. So let's say, for instance, burnout is a classical thing. So I'm always removing the biggest noise to begin with, because often, which is very often, I see that, and people always ask me that, like, what can I do more because I feel like this? And I always say, let's look at what you probably should remove before you actually add on. Because we live in this time where we just want to optimize, we want to stimulate, we want to add on, because that's what we have been programmed from the macro with the environment. Take more of this and you feel like this, or do these 3 things and you would experience this and that. But that's the opposite way, that I would probably flip it all around and say, what is the issues? What do we need to extract, probably, in order for you to have more of what you're seeking, so you don't just overstimulate instead of building up from the bottom, because we all have that ability from our biology.
Yeah, because like you're just sort of loading the system, right? More and more and more. Exactly. With everything that we do. And yeah, things like, yeah, I totally like agree as well. Like, you know, there's so much going on in our world these days. And, you know, people don't necessarily realize like all the stresses that they have. And they think they're also operating perfectly. Like you said, you're like, no worries, you know. But then it just hits you and you have no flipping idea why. Like, and that's because you just haven't been taking care of everything. And you actually wrote an interesting post about it. And you touched on it now. You said another thing, or you say, here's what surprised me most. When we actually identify the root cause, it's almost never the workload, right? So lots of people like complain that they're like, you know, it's just, I got too much going on. But it's actually not that, because you probably are way more capable than you even realize. And what you said then is the work isn't what broke them. What broke them was working hard without biological support, poor sleep, gut dysfunction, nutrient depletion, chronic stress, etc., high cognitive load, pushing through while the system was already incoherent.
Mm.
And I mean, like, I know we've like really just touched on this already, but it's just like, it's, can we just maybe talk about it like a little bit more, like on sort of the levels that you go into? Because you then say the biology couldn't carry it anymore. And you talk about things like on a mitochondrial level that it could be dysfunctioning. You know, you might have systematic inflammation.
Mm.
What are these things for, like, say, the normal person, like, and so that they can understand it? Like, is there an easy way to describe what is maybe going on there?
I think it actually is such a good example you bring up because again, a lot of high achievers, they actually like to work. So it's not because suddenly they don't like to work. They actually feel fulfilled with accomplishing something, creating something, or making a change in either their own business or in the company they're part of. So it's not my experience that they have this that, oh, suddenly I can't handle. I'm not saying it's good for anybody to just work 80 to 100 hours, of course. So, but the thing is that suddenly, and it's usually going on again, like late 30s, beginning of the 40s, that's when they start to feel that they probably cannot have the same pace anymore because they're living based on that model or that framework that they used to know themselves best in, which means they like to have a high pace. They like to have a lot of things going on at the same time. And because they haven't matched the biology to their identity, because their biology is changing over the years, like we talked about before, so that might mean that they're more sensitive to the way they used to be able to live. And I'm saying in terms of nutrition, less recovery and stuff, they might be able to compensate for that in the 20s, which most people are. And suddenly the biology cannot really handle that pressure anymore. It cannot keep compensating for it. And it might also be that over those years, you might be a little bit more sedentary or maybe not prioritizing your exercise as much or not eating as healthy or maybe drinking more alcohol or whatever it is. It doesn't look dramatic on paper, but because it's a limited time that your biology can keep compensating for it. So that's what I mean about when we then dive into it. And I see that so many times when like CEOs or directors or even regular people actually always been liking the job. They like to work and stuff, and suddenly they just crash completely.
Mm.
And what we then identify with the coaching, of course, because then it's also about understanding what is actually going on. Besides that, what is actually triggering you? And sometimes we have these, not just sometimes, we all have different ways of being triggered on a, let's say, on a neurological way. So that means that some people might obviously be triggered by the workload. I think there's actually research that was backed up on that. I don't remember the name of that, where they looked into what are people's majority of the triggers that pulls them out of the game. And it was not workload for these high achievers, weirdly enough. A lot of it could be something like lack of control. And I see that a lot, especially in people with a lot of responsibility. That's probably also what they feel is what drives them is that feeling of control, or at least imagining that they have in control.
So what do you mean? Do you mean like they losing control? Is that or
Yeah, so
yeah?
when people have that main trigger as lack of control can trigger their stress response. That
Uh-huh.
also means it might not be an actual control, but it's a feeling of control. So you might be in a big corporation and have a huge responsibility in your management team, and suddenly there's something from the top that is changing the organization and changing your work roles and anything like that. And suddenly you feel like you're not in control. You might not have been in control before that, but our reality changes as we age, of course.
Mm.
So that belief of control is what might can actually really bring people out of this. So with that, we always look at, besides understanding that how can they still have that feeling? How can they rebuild that feeling of control? Even though they're in a situation where they might not actually have control, because nobody has complete control anyway. It's also about understanding that. So none of us are ever completely in control. We just like to think that.
Yeah.
But you can still have a sense of control, at least with what you can control. And this is another thing I see is in athletes as well, because they think there are a lot of control within what they're doing, but they're usually very very rare in control of the situation, whether they would win the game or that their team can win, etc. So again, when we then narrow those things down, we can start rebuild from that perspective. So what they have as a mental barrier that actually accumulated those things can actually trigger that increase of cortisol, because they feel stressed in the moment. They feel like they lose this autonomy, they lose agency. And with that comes the biggest trigger, which is again the root cause, could be lack of control. And when that just spirals and keep growing, then obviously biology follows, because you have a mental belief according to that. So that means suddenly, because you have stress or stress triggered because you feel like you're out of control in a situation or in a decision making, and then the cortisol just keeps rising. And if you then have not necessarily a big crash of stress, but you have a low chronic rate of inflammation based on that high spike of cortisol, then that accumulates in the brain as well. So it's just like an ongoing spiral, which affects a lot of things. So that's like the connection of these things. So again, that's an environment affect consequences on your biology, on your internal system. So it starts with, who am I? My identity have lost control because of something in the environment. And when I don't recognize myself as the feeling I used to have, because I've told myself when I'm in control, then that spirals down to our nervous system. So our nervous system feels under threat. And when our nervous system feels threatened by our external environment, then suddenly the cortisol starts to affect us. And then that affects the whole micro level, which is the biology. So it either triggers or turns off some of the genetics.
Wow, that's interesting. So you're saying it kind of works like it can work top down.
Oh yeah,
as well as, like, of course, from that's interesting. So would this happen, say, when people like professional sportsmen, they go from being a professional sportsman to just a normal civilian, like they have this change in identity, and now or somebody that is like a top businessman, but now they're retired and they got nothing. Like, are these those sort of identity changes which could trigger that?
Absolutely. Actually, I don't know if that was the podcast you also heard, but I was on a series of podcasts where it was called Life After Ball, for the same reason. So people that used to be in professional sport who were now retired. So why is it that I feel so awful? Why is it that I cannot recognize myself? Why is it that I don't feel joy in anything? And all of this is obviously based on, firstly, which I think is a really overlooked area, is that firstly, when you come from a lot of sport, which means obviously what happens on a biological level is it's a lot of processes that you suddenly don't have, which means you burn off some of the stress, you burn off some of the frustrations or whatever we have in our life. But it also supports a lot of functions, which is then kind of keeping the physiology in balance on many levels. You sleep better and stuff like that. So when you suddenly remove that out of the equation, then you suddenly don't really have that. You might have a lot of difficult things built up inside of you. And suddenly that affects your identity, because now you suddenly cannot, I used to feel like I was energized. I used to do this. Why am I not myself anymore? So suddenly you get a direct consequences from your biology affecting your identity. And then at the same time, you have the external thing, which is the environment. You don't have the same peers around you. You don't have your teammates, and you don't have somebody to kind of set the agenda, which most athletes do. So you have to invent all that. So it's kind of affecting all the layers. But one layer can create this consequence, this negative consequence, which then pushes to the other ones. And suddenly you have this whole cascade of not really recognizing who you are as an individual on the mental level, on a cognitive level, but also on a biological level.
I can imagine that there's like, you almost need like a sort of transition coach or something like that, because a lot of these guys, they must just, I don't know, almost go into depression maybe, guys and girls, of course, because they like I said, lack of identity and everything else that they don't have that you just mentioned. Like, it can be quite a spiral downhill, I imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it is. I think, I don't know how it is, and I think it's different, obviously, from country to country, but I do know that in America, there's apparently a lot of suicide within retired athletes as well, which is horrible that they even have to be in that place.
Mm.
But again, it's about support, and that's actually why we have been doing this series of podcasts, because we think it's such a really important step. But it could also be like I even have people that are about to retire in business who has the same thing. So they're kind of preparing themselves for what would be my best potential for maintaining who I am, so I don't lose my identity, I don't lose my health, because suddenly I don't have all these requirements, all these expectations. So how would that look? So I have a lot of clients actually who are preparing themselves for the afterlife, in the longevity after the career, for instance. But I think it's super important.
Yeah. And even like there's another layer, and I think this is such an important relationship that people don't necessarily think a lot about, and don't mean it in an egotistical way at all, but our relationship to money, right? So
Mm.
these guys have like, you know, all the money in the world, you know, while they're playing, you know.
Yes.
But now when they stop, that paycheck, you know, disappears. So there's
Mm.
probably that thing as well, that like now they're like, oh, I'm not as of much value anymore in a way, you know, just on
Mm.
a psychological level, they might feel
Yeah.
that too. So there's, you know, everything kind of attacking their system, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and again, like you said, because that's the whole point of all this, is that you can still be incoherent and regulate that back to being in a coherent state, but you gotta do it according to where you are in life and where you want to be, because it's not like the same thing, like I said, in each decade. So we just have a different way of putting those things together. So we also need to kind of approach them according to where we are in life, age-wise.
Yeah, that's fascinating. There's something interesting that you write about as well, and maybe you can just explain a little bit about it. It's called methylation capacity, and like, you know, something that you think is overlooked a lot is like people's, yeah, methylation capacity. Can you just mention that a little bit, because it seems to maybe tie in a little bit with what we're now chatting about.
Yeah, so methylation is obviously a gene expression. So methylation is a really, when you look at genetics, is one of the most important things to understand. Not the most, but it's one of the most, at least to understand that. Because again, if you have a piano, you have a set keys, so those tones will never change. But the methylation is the epigenetic expression of whether which genes is actually being turned on or off. So that's why it's so important to understand. So let me give you an example for, there's a certain gene which also is very important. So how well you metabolize dopamine, adrenaline, and noradrenaline, for instance, which is related to sort of the stress family, which is obviously not necessarily just that. But when we produce those chemicals for whatever we need them for, dopamine for being this, having the right decision, focus, and attention, of course, and then the adrenaline could be part of that as well. Let's say a player, or let's say someone who's excited for a certain project at work. So you will release any of these chemicals depending on what the task requires, and not the other way around, which most people think. So when, for instance, you have a slow metabolizing of those certain chemicals, then for some individuals, that might be accumulated inside of you. So that might be leading them to having overthinking, anxiety, stress related, waking up at night, etc. Because you just don't metabolize, you don't burn these chemicals off in the right pace you're supposed to. On the other hand, however, you could also be a fast metabolizer, which means that as soon as you have dopamine release, it's pretty quickly burned off. So that means you might have an issue of not keep being motivated, having drive or focus, because you just kind of run out of dopamine quickly. And that's where part of the methylation is about understanding that it's really good to know which one are you, because again, if you have that issue of being an overthinking and it's kind of accumulated eventually as an anxiety or depression, well, if that's a chemical correspondence, then understanding those things, we can put some intervention in play so the individual doesn't have this too much chemistry floating in the system.
This might sound like a stupid question, but are there, say, like strands of your genetics or DNA, I don't know the right terminology, but like that are only activated through this, methylation capacity at certain times in your life? Like, are they just kind of sitting there dormant? I don't know, I'm just thinking of a question around that. It just kind of popped up now.
You think like in certain situations or in certain phases of life?
Yeah, just phases of life. So like you've got this one that's actually, it's there, but it's only going to kick in when you're 50 because that's kind of when your body needs it. No,
so the genetic blueprint, this is something we're born with, and it never changes until we die. Mm-hmm. So you cannot actually change the genetic, which is also kind of an easy way, because then when you know it, you know it. It's not like it's going to change. It's not like you need to address it differently. However, some things, because again, like I said before, let's say you have a food intolerance, just to give you a good example. That's also a genetic gene that actually have that information. So obviously, if you have a food intolerance, that's never going to change. You might not experience something from it in your younger age. Again, because biology is clever, it's good at compensating until it's not. And I hear that a lot when I then have some people, let's say in the 40s, and they get their genetics done, and then they realize that maybe the things that you also are dealing with in terms of high inflammation actually comes from a food intolerance. And then when we discover what food intolerance they have, they're like, no, but I never had any problems, because in Denmark, at least, we've always been programmed from kids that we should drink half a liter of milk, for instance, every single day. And whatever, we can take that on another discussion. But so they don't really understand it, because I've always been drinking milk and I never had any problems with it. But that problem might not come out as you would expect it to do, because it's an intolerance, but it might actually affect the rest of the system. So if you at the same time has a sensitivity for inflammation, for instance, then that food intolerance you have on one hand might trigger the inflammation on the other. And then that can be causing everything else, which means a slow recovery and neuroinflammation, which can lead to brain fog and slow decision making and anxiety and stuff like that. So it can actually have a lot of cascade in terms of what it really triggers versus what you would imagine that it would be caused.
So I just want to try another example here, if that's okay with you. So like, say when in your 30s, you can still kind of eat like what you want, say, and then 40s is like, okay, cool. Well, now I'm just noticing, especially as guys, we put weight on around our tummies first, girls generally around their bums first, right? So, is that because is that tied to the methylation capacity that's linked to sort of metabolizing things? Or is that just one of the age things that you talk about? Like, and then I'll ask a question after that.
Yeah. Okay. So there was a lot of questions in that. So basically, methylation or any of the other things, it's not like you can just ignore them until you're 30. Just to make that clear, you might just experience a real consequence, obviously, the older we get. And the reason being is that the mitochondria, which is the energy production, that in itself would also kind of degenerate the older we get. Either we have less mitochondria or it's less functioning efficiently enough. And that leads to that accumulation of a lot of things, of course, and affecting a lot of things. So our hormones is affecting again, and our insulin sensitivity, etc., because that's also genetic things. So again, when we experience things as we age, is partly because the engine have been running quite a while, like I usually say, to give you that metaphor. So the longer you have kind of been without having this service checkup with your car, then suddenly you start to feel that, maybe there's something that's not working properly. So that's usually how, I don't know if that explains it or not.
Yeah. So let me just say it more clear, because it wasn't good on my side. So like, say I could eat as much rice as I wanted to up until I was 40, right? And that didn't really affect me. Now I'm like I'm still eating the same amount of rice, and I'm like still doing the same training and still doing the same, but like I'm noticing I'm not really I'm putting on weight, not losing weight. Is that more clear? Like, is that,
Yeah.
how can we sort of explain like the solution to that one? Is it, I've just got to cut out the rice, or do I need to realign my body with what kind of, you talk about?
Well, there could be, again, genetically, we have a different preference of fuel. So some people, they actually have a high preferences for carbohydrates, and other people have a high preference for fat, for instance, or high protein. So again, we're back to the general recommendation never works. That's probably why, because some people, especially lately with all these diet trends and whatever we're being recommended, is like cut out carbs and then eat tons of protein and eat tons of fat or no fat. So we have been so misled over the years with, I mean, I've been in the industry for many years and I cannot even count how many different diet trends that we have been with. And some of the answers could potentially be that you genetically is actually not really having carbohydrates as a preference. So that means that eventually you would see that, but maybe when you're younger, the muscles are more efficient. The burning, metabolism mechanism obviously works in a higher functioning way the younger we are.
Mm.
Another thing that could also be is when the hormones changes, that might affect the insulin. And so the insulin, so I would definitely always try to understand the full picture of it. So it's not like just do this and everything is fixed, because it's very rare that that's the issue, to be honest. And also, what is maybe lying underneath it? Is there actually some sort of inflammation? Is there some sort of gut dysbiosis you might be dealing with, which enables unable anything? So it's hard to just say that it could just be the rice. It would be very rare that I would just point fingers at that. It could be what other circumstances might affect your disability to burn fat in the way that you might have been used to.
Yeah, yeah, it makes total sense. But I guess like people almost want like an easy answer too, it's like,
We all do. We all
and
do.
it's not, that's not the thing. Which just makes me think again, like how do we actually kind of bring this sort of testing and stuff like to the masses? You know what I mean? Like I'm assuming it's maybe quite expensive now for people to do, but have you seen like a trend that actually like a lot of things in the world get cheaper? Like is it something that's becoming more available, cheaper, etc.?
Mhm. Well, I'm hoping it's obviously not cheap for sure. So I'm hoping, of course, with an increase of requirements for those sort of information and more clinics are starting to use it as well. Personally, I'm always leaning on for only practitioner tests, to be honest, again, because I have a lot of people that have bought a cheap test online and then they're like, wait, what is that? And so they come to me, and it's not like we cannot use the information depending on what it is. But I feel like because what I have specialized in is always to translate the information to performance and not just for health. Not that it don't matter, but because I feel like there's a lot of not accurate information as well in the random test that people just do online, which means that they just recommend something that would be right for, let's say, inflammation. And then they recommend what I've seen at least, then they recommend a lot of supplements based on this have been shown in studies to be good for inflammation. All right, but then again, if we look at some of the other gene SNPs, which is called the gene variants, they might actually not respond very well to that supplement. And then I don't feel like that the random tests, they don't factor those things in, which I think is the majority of the puzzle, is to understand every gene affects each other. It's not like you can look at one gene and then say, oh, I have a high inflammation, and then you just supplement crazy with that. Because what about the cortisol? Are you sensitive to cortisol? How do we address that then? And apparently, because you have another methylation gene that don't respond well to this anti-inflammatory, then the whole circle goes back again. So that was just my personal experience and an opinion in terms of the testing. However, those I don't test anymore. I have obviously created a questionnaire based on what I could normally see a pattern, based on the genetics, the biology, etc. So I prefer, of course, to have the testing to lean upon that. But because again, I have done this so many years, and then I can easily sort of get an idea of where we are just from understanding these things. So that's another way to do it as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and but unfortunately, there's not everyone with your kind of like expertise, right?
Yeah,
And wisdom of having dealt with so many people to pick up these patterns and stuff.
yeah,
But yeah, to me, it just seems like wow, this is a like an amazing opportunity to kind of like lift us all up. You know what I mean? Like because they,
yeah.
you know, people are just walking around these days, kind of like zombies, for different reasons, but also just so unaware of, you know, their bodies. Um, yeah, and if only this like information was like really easily available, like
Mm,
they could make. Sometimes it's just tweaks, right? It's not even like a massive change. Maybe you know, it might just be like,
yeah,
well, you know what, you need to be getting more sunlight because that's really what's impacting you. But
yeah.
yeah,
But I totally agree, and that's also why that I have decided to write a book on this, which we are in process with at the moment. For the same reason. So what I see is that we seriously live in a time where people are just completely fragmented, and on based on, not that there's anything wrong with people's approach or how we're doing things. It's not the model that actually works. It's that it might not work for us. And
mm,
because of that, we are just overloaded in information, recommendation, and do this for 3 days and suddenly your life will change and all that. But we don't really factor in or understand but what is necessarily in the person and in the biology that I live in, which is again, that's completely individual. So I think again, which is something we bring up in the book as well, because we just sat here, my team and I, when we got to a stage which was like in 21, that I was in dialogue with one of the biggest American football clubs. And when I realized that this is like the richest club in the world, I was thinking, wait, what? Are they not doing this? Because that was my expectation. I didn't feel like at that point that this is something that nobody else would do. It's not like the access was secret for me. It's there, the research, the science, it's out there. I mean, we just spent lots of time, like 3.5 year intensively, we just digged up all this research out there, and it's available. If it's available for us, it's available for everybody else. Nobody have just bothered to find that. Even people in the professional industry, they haven't bothered actually look into the research. And that was a little bit of a puzzle for me, because I was like, that is odd when we have access to these things and these institutions, the biggest institutions in the world in terms of research and the professors, they have put something out publicly. So because of that, we started to look into, so what is the reason? How have we gotten to this place today? Because it cannot be that we're all just doing something wrong. But what we then looked into, which took us actually 400 years back in time, from René Descartes, which was an old philosopher. And he was back in the days, which is that many years ago. He is the reason for our fragmentation approach that we have in medicine, in being human being, in everything. Because back then he realized that it's too hard to dig into the expertise of understanding human beings if we have the brain, the mental part of it. The psychology, we need to separate that, because he also believed that anything that's related to psychology is more on the religious level, and we cannot bring the religion into the human being. So that was when he fragmented that, he separated the mind from the body.
mm,
Until then, we have actually had a really holistic approach to understanding human beings. So when we then looked at what came after that separation was the industrialization. So that means that everything became that looking at humans as machines. So we just have a body part, and then we have experts, especially as expert on one specific thing, and then we kind of change the part, and the machinery runs again. But as we all know, we're not machines.
yeah.
But that's the approach, and this is what we do in medicine. I mean, we look at the symptom, we fix that, but we don't understand the root cause. We don't understand the psychological approach on that as well. So that was what actually led us to where we decided that we need to get this message out. We need to change our approach. because there's nothing wrong with all the expertise. We just need to understand how they correlate. And it's never just one place that these things are rooted. Never.
Yeah, I think you might find some pushback, right? Because you're kind of disrupting all these industries, and they're protective
Yeah.
at the end of the day. I mean, it's a
Mm.
money making, not racket, but it's a money making thing, right? A lot of the
You
time,
know.
especially when it comes to say medicine, and and people are just protective. They're like, well, I'm a physio, so I know what I'm doing, and well, I'm a chiro, and I know what I'm doing, and I'm a doctor, so you know what I mean. They're like,
Yeah.
and they're like,
Yeah.
oh, I can help you. So, but you are essentially like kind of disrupting that whole
I
model,
know.
and they, yeah, so don't expect to sort of have an easy ride, you know what I mean? I don't say that in a
No.
horrible way, but I just
No,
know
no,
that
no.
that's what they like. They've I mean, in America, I think they attacked the chiropractic industry for like 15 years, and they almost destroyed it completely. The
It,
medical industry did that, right? And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it took a lot to kind of get a bit of
Yeah.
sort of recognition and confidence back in the industry, and still they
Yeah.
still probably suffer from it today.
I would
Um,
imagine.
yeah,
That's exactly what we see in sport, especially, which is again very controversial to say these things. But obviously, in our last 3.5, almost now 4 years of intense research, we had to be in dialogue with not just the clients that are work within sport and the people, the team that work with the high tier athletes, which is the physio and the sports science expert and all these really good experts because they're really good at what they're good at. So we have really been yeah, in South Africa, in Brazil, in America, in whatever. We have really been diving into everywhere just to find out why is that they look at this way. So this would definitely be a controversial thing. But what we did discover in 24 was actually that FC Barcelona was publishing research, a 5-year research on both their first teams, on the male and the female, which means that they have actually done this, sort
mm,
of this, not the mental part of it, which is what I'm also adding on to this, but they have looked into a lot of things that they got so much information from. And and just the result they created based on that was just mind-blowing. And they published that and shared it to the world, which you would then think that wouldn't that be something we should all look into? Because apparently they're just sharing that's their secret. And they did that not because they were broken or didn't perform well. They did it at a point where they were actually in a really good level of performance. So despite that, being creative, being innovative and thinking, okay, we're actually in a good place. Let's see if there's something more we need to understand in this. And that led them to actually buy the whole gene company, which we actually, not later than 2 weeks ago, were in dialogue with the head of medical and the gene company of the same reason, because we're sharing completely this understanding of what performance is actually based on.
mm.
So it's very interesting that we're so close-minded, lack of curiosity maybe, but I'm pretty sure eventually they're gonna start to realize, because it's not that we don't need the experts in the areas they're experts at. On the contrary, we just need to understand how things correlate to each other so we have a better understanding of the individual.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like a threat, right? Because
No, no, no.
on their levels, they can still really help with, the
Yes. Oh, yeah.
overall performance of but if we can actually understand, okay, cool, we definitely need you, and
Mm.
we definitely need you. So yeah, it's not like you're replacing them or anything, but it's just
Oh, no,
bringing
no.
everything together. Um,
Yeah, because I'm not an expert in any of those things. I'm not a physio. I'm not a
yeah.
sports science. I'm just supporting with what's lying underneath that and what systems might be relevant. And usually, actually, when I have been brought into some athletes that might be have an ongoing recurring injury situation, and again, like they have the best expertise around them, and still they cannot seem to understand why is this individual always being injured, almost by looking at the ball and then he's injured again. And it's again because I have seen this for so many years and I'm never really surprised. And I always say if it's not biomechanical, it's biochemical. It's
Mhm.
really not that complicated. And that's the only area they don't look into. It's about understanding these things from a biochemical level.
Yeah. Oh well. Yeah. hopefully you'll be set for life now. So once this takes off, you know what I mean?
Let's see how open-minded they are.
Yeah, I've just got like just before we finish off here, I read something really interesting. There's this guy, his name is Hans Amato. He writes quite a bit on X on Twitter, and he wrote this thing. And I just want to read like just the first bit and the second bit, and it ties in exactly with what I think kind of you're also doing. And he wrote, I watched a guy come from barely being able to make eye contact to walking into rooms like he owned them in about 6 weeks. So he wasn't confident, and then he says it wasn't confidence coaching, it wasn't therapy, wasn't any of that. We fixed his GABA signaling. Okay, and then he finishes off with GABA production depends on glutamate conversion, which depends on B6, which depends on gut absorption, which depends on intestinal barrier integrity. And the guy I mentioned, his gut was cooked. We didn't give him any neurotropic or anti-anxiety, anything. We just fixed his digestion. A couple of weeks later, his whole personality shifted because his brain could finally produce enough GABA to let him relax.
That's such a good example. And I could give you lots of those as well, because this is such a good example for when people don't really understand that nutrition is basically our medicine. And I'm not just saying that because it's like a health cliche, but when we eat and the body converts those things, that the nutrients that are in that, in the food we eat, those nutrients, which would be like the copper, the B6, the vitamins and the minerals, those are required to release the neurochemicals. And that means that's kind of what I call the popcorn of the brain. But if you don't have the right nutrients to it, or you cannot absorb them based on your genetics, because you might have some inabilities based on your genetics. So already if the pathway is shut, if the door is shut, you don't have access to that. And secondly, to understand the digestion part of that is a lot of these the brain popcorn is actually being released and produced in the gut. So if you already have that gut dysbiosis, inflammation, or whatever it might be, you just don't have that release of these psychological or mental popcorn, as I would like to call them. And with that, I could actually give you an example. I had a basketball player some years ago, and he was suddenly during the season, he was just experiencing chronic diarrhea, anxiety, and depression, and couldn't sleep. And it was obviously devastating for him to keep performing with that. I mean, imagine getting on the pitch and then not really knowing if you need something.
Yeah.
So he was struggling a lot, and he didn't recover because he couldn't sleep. And it was just a spiral of bad things that kept going on. So in this baseball team, they have a staff of 100 people, something maybe even plus. That's normal in baseball. So they have like a huge staff of experts, again, fragmented experts, but nevertheless, they're experts. And he went all the way through, and nobody could really see what it was. So he was sent to the hospital to have this, what's it called, an
Endoscope.
What's it called?
Endoscope. Endoscoptic, something like that.
I cannot
when
remember
they're doing your colon, that one.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So they obviously thought he had something wrong in there, and so they didn't find anything. And he was just being told that he probably had IBS, so irritable bowel syndrome, which most people just get told if they cannot find out what is going on in your gut. So then the next part would be that he was sent to the psychologist, because apparently you must have had a trauma or something. And it could have been, but he said, but I'm actually pretty balanced. I have a good family behind me. I haven't really experienced anything. So I didn't really know what to say. I mean, how should I reinvent some trauma or something? So obviously they didn't find anything. And then eventually he was recommended to see me over a period. And it was like, I could just, maybe we have this, maybe we have this, maybe we have this. And by regulating based on his information, so both on his genetic level and on his the current state biochemical level, we were then able to identify completely the root cause of this. So besides having a massive gut inflammation he had, he was also having from his genetic, he had severe food intolerances, both from gluten and dairy, and that was mainly what he ate. So, and then like something can suddenly make things change. So he might not have experienced a lot with it, but suddenly something that could have been a virus triggering that, and then it's just suddenly too much for the body. And that was obviously causing the diarrhea. When you have that chronic diarrhea, then you're not able to produce enough serotonin and the GABA and all these other things. So he couldn't sleep. He didn't feel his identity was starting to shatter. So there was a lot of things that he was obviously dealing with, but based on one thing. So that was his root cause. And when we changed that thing, it was just like, I mean, it's not like woo-woo magic or something. It's just about, this is you. Let's do what's right for you instead of trying to have you have all these things that's not right for you. And within 3 weeks, he didn't even have diarrhea. Within
Wow.
6 weeks, he slept. He had no anxiety, no depression whatsoever. And then he came back and said, "Oh, Dorthe, I forgot to tell you that actually I've had a shoulder injury for 5 years." But he thought that was part of my sport because it's baseball. So he just kind of accepted it and lived with it because they couldn't do anything about it with physio training or anything. But that was gone as well. And for me, I
Wow.
always say that's what I can consider a side effect because I see that so many times. People they come, "Oh, I forgot to tell you my foot, a triathlete that had that as well. Suddenly he didn't have any pain in his foot." And I'm like, "Yeah, but that's because your internal system is operating at the right level."
Mm.
So, and that was completely like you mentioned that article as well with that example. So again, our biology is identifying who we are as is determining who we are as an identity. So that makes completely sense. If you don't have access to the right brain chemicals, then suddenly you don't feel the identity that you would actually have thought of or felt that you should be.
Wow. Fascinating. I love it. It's so cool. Like,
Yeah.
and it's again, it's like you use the data, you use the information, and then you make a tweak, right? Like it's not like you changed a lot. It doesn't sound like,
No. No.
and that impacted the guy's future completely, and it is everything about him, you
Yeah.
impacted.
Completely. And
Incredible.
the worst thing about that story, just to let you on that, I mean, the good thing was that he was completely, he felt like he could walk on water. Suddenly he felt just great and he didn't have had any shoulder that was limiting his. So actually he was able to pitch in the same pace as he would normally be doing halfway through season. So that was just,
Wow.
and that was just like, it's not because I'm doing something in a little future ball or anything. It's just about we have to understand it from the right perspective.
I'm wondering, did that have like any impact for you? Like, did like say, like there's a coaching staff of 100 people. Did they come to you and they go, listen, how, or can we know more? Or, was there that curiosity?
That was such a funny question because then I would imagine that you have been through the whole staff, you have been sent to a hospital, you've been sent to a psychologist, and then suddenly you show up 4 weeks later and you're well. Wouldn't you then expect somebody to say, "Oh, what did you do?" But no, no. You know what they said? Ah, that's good. You have had your luck, so it was probably just passed away by itself. And when he then performed so well, better than the average of where he was supposed to be, then they were just about, yeah, but this is probably your season. You're finally breaking it. So no, I unfortunately there's very, very lack of curiosity when these things happen, which is so weird. So
Mm.
what I hear the most of the coaches always say is that that's just luck.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. Oh, well, cool. The cool thing is like, look, you're never going to be out of business. You're always going to be having to educate people, and that's
yeah,
cool. You can,
agree.
and you got your life to do that now, which is amazing. And this book sounds fascinating. I definitely will be one of your first buyers of it. I can promise
That's
you that.
amazing. That's
Um,
amazing. I can't wait to have it out.
yeah, cool. And is there anything else that you like excited about the future that you have coming up?
Mm, Well, I mean, I'm super excited about this in general. So, because this is like what I'm passionate about. I love to spread it. I love to share it. I love to see the result, first of all. That is obviously why we have decided to get it even further. So I'm super excited about actually having the book out when we get to that final stage of that, because I think that can definitely, I mean, it's a philosophical and biological change of approach in terms of lifestyle, in terms of well-being, in terms of performance in general. So I do actually believe that there's a lot of people that can definitely benefit hugely with this, for sure.
How do you like, so say someone like me, I'm like, okay, I want to know more about this business. Like I want to be, say, certified in like being able to do this and help people. You know what I mean? Like, is that something you sort of considering or whatever? Like, because, you know, I mean, I guess you almost like need a little army now to sort of go out there and help and that sort of stuff. Have you ever considered that? Like,
Yeah.
okay, cool, I'm going to create a course or I'm going to coach coaches or,
Yeah, that's actually also another interesting question because I think we started doing that because, again, my partner was a little bit frustrated that a lot of this was in my head and it was just based on many years of accumulating information and then understanding how to put it together. And they were a little bit like, how do we actually, build this in so we can teach it or learn it? And so he was gathering all the information, putting the science behind it, and really, I don't even know how many pages we have now put together. So that was actually meant to be a teaching framework that we were to create to begin with. So we already have the material to teach that. However, we're still in that developing process of it because, again, it's also a little bit about where do you start? What minimum requirements does people have to have in order for this, and where do we actually start? Because at the end of the day, we cannot, if we were to teach on, let's say, anatomy and physiology and then genes and stuff, it might be like really too deep, and maybe also too deep for somebody who actually don't really want to go that deep. So we're in the middle of, we have the material put together. We're definitely going to do it. And actually, I love to teach. So I see it as a natural progress. And I love to work because I have done a lot of coaching, the coaches courses. So I actually do love to work with people that work with people to give them these extra tools in whatever profession they're already at. So thanks for reminding me of that.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, it's such a great addition, to help people that are also trying to help people, like, because like they'll be like, like someone will be trying to help somebody and then they go, oh, well, you should do this, you should write a journal and you should whatever, but like actually not really telling them the right thing because you haven't tested, say, their biology and stuff. So that's why I think it's like, it's amazing the stuff that you're doing. So, and then if people want to get hold of you or in touch with you, what is the best way?
Well, my website is currently under construction, but it's there. It might just look different if you go into that in a week's time, but that's just my name, dorthehummel.dk. I'm actually also I'm trying to pull myself together to do the podcast. So I'm going to be having a lot of educational thing on a podcast and YouTube as well. So hopefully that's within weeks that we're going to have our first edition out on that. So that's going to be another level that it's another way to actually really dive deep into this material so people can start to kind of get a more understanding of it. Yeah.
Cool. And also you have a newsletter on LinkedIn, which I encourage people to,
Yes.
and also just follow you on LinkedIn because that's where, I
Yes.
got all this information. It was just fascinating. So,
Yes, thank you.
cool. And then, Dorthe, this is my last question. What does ridiculously human mean to you?
Yeah, I was actually looking into that as well because I love the title because it makes you reflect a little bit like what does that actually mean? I would probably, for myself, I would probably say this is where you open for less boundaries in terms of what you're capable of. That's how I look at it, which is also why it resonates with me. Thinking about like that, you're not limited by anything potentially. You obviously you might have something, but you can work around it, so it will be less a limitation. But I see it as a potential.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's so true, right? And
What was that? So I need to ask you then. So what was the idea behind choosing that?
you know what? So when I first started, it was me and my friend. We did the podcast for years, and we were just like, cool. Let's just think of a name, and we did this like exercise where you just write down a few words like each, and we're doing it sort of together, but at the same time, and like so we wrote down a few words, and then we just like we read them out loud. And yeah, one of us had ridiculously and one of us had human and other words too. And then we just went, man, ridiculously human sounds pretty cool. And
Yeah.
that was it. It was literally like a 10-minute exercise, and
Yeah.
we slept on it. And then we woke up the next day and we're like, definitely, that's an awesome name.
Yeah,
So,
that's super amazing. But that's the interesting thing about the like word, because again, like my coherence model is also like when I tried to explain this years ago, it's like, yeah, but then we are a little bit here, and people are like, I don't get it. No,
yeah,
I understand you don't get it because it is complex. But then when I was like, oh, but this is coherence people are looking for. They just don't have a word for it. They don't subconsciously, we don't know what we're actually seeking.
mm,
But we might have, well, I have lack of energy. I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel energized or whatever we feel like we're missing. But at the end of the day, what we're looking for is what coherence can give you. So for me, that was the same thing about that one word, when it just suddenly clicks and it resonates, it's easier to kind of get around with it.
yeah, absolutely. And then like also it's sort of like now when you speak about it, you and you kind of can just refer back to coherence, and then everything that you say and you write about, like, the macro level, the micro, the meso, like it all makes
Yeah,
sense because you're like, yeah, well, that's coherence, isn't it? So
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
I'm super
Exactly.
excited for you, and thanks again for just like making me have that like, aha, yeah, get
I'm
it.
so glad you did. I mean, it just, yeah, I mean, I appreciate that so much, like I said in the beginning, because that just means so much that the message is apparently understandable and it resonates more importantly, because that's what their whole idea is about. It's not about making life more complicated than it already is for most of us. And we have so much information, we have an overload of information, and what actually eventually happens is nothing. So I'm so glad that you really resonated that as a coach yourself, saying, "Oh, but maybe this makes sense. Maybe this is why some of these things might not actually work as well with each individual." So when we
Yeah,
start to understand this, we start to having an awareness of what might also be going on. What of these levels or layers do I actually need to revisit rather than keep pushing on another level that might not be resonating or even adaptable for the body.
yeah,
So that's super good.
yeah, absolutely, definitely. I mean, yeah, I think it will make people just like, if they are coaches or, whatever it is, like if you're a
Mm.
teacher, if you're just helping people, a carer, whatever it is, like, who knows, even maybe the experts will start thinking about their roles a little differently.
Hopefully, yeah.
That I guess is the ultimate goal. So yeah, I just
Yeah.
wanted to say thanks so much for coming on the podcast. Yeah, like
Thank you so much for having me.
no, it's a pleasure. I literally love the work you're doing, and I think it's so important. And yeah, I just wish you all the best, seriously. And I'm definitely following you and buying the book and keeping in touch. That's for sure. Because
Thank
I mean,
you.
like I think I mentioned before we started, there's lots of sports in South Africa is massive. Like
I know.
I mean, it, like school sports in South Africa, as an example, is massive, right?
Mm,
Imagine you can
mm,
get this into kids at that age, or coaches at that
yeah.
age. I mean, we have sports here like rugby, for example. High school
Yeah.
matches can get 20,000 people. I mean, that's crazy. Like,
Yeah.
it's like American football in America. High school matches
Yeah.
also, they have like
Yeah.
10,000 people at a high school match. University matches like 60, 80,000. Like,
Yeah.
if you can get in there early with this sort of stuff, like, yes,
Yeah.
it changes so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, and also when I actually work with the very young athletes, which I feel a lot of joy in, because again, like I always say to them, the sooner you start implementing and understanding this, the easier it is. It's almost like, it might be a silly example, but it's almost like you want a driver's license, and then you just buy the textbook about it. Well, you might eventually learn to drive, but it would make so much more sense if someone sits next to you and bring you into the vehicle and then train you on it, and then you're good to go. It's the same thing about the sooner you start to implement and learn and learn to be aware of things, which is also not never the same, then of course it's gonna give you a great bonus on the rest of your life, because it's like we're never constantly in coherence, but the more we get in and out of it, we also understand to identify these things. So I totally agree. I mean, and the more young people that start to be curious about what does that mean for them, what is my best best way of getting into coherence. So when they then start to see it on the performance, their well-being, their mental health, and all these things, of course, it's applicable for everybody.
Yeah, one of my best friends and I, we always say, because we like become, I guess, more knowledgeable over the years, and we're like, man, like we used to swim like quite competitively at school, and like before our swimming race, we'd have like a Coke and a chocolate, and we were like, man, you know, like we just were doing the total wrong thing because we're like, yeah, this is giving us the energy, but not having any idea. Actually, you know what? It's
Yeah,
the week leading up to it. It's not that food; it's other things like.
yeah,
So yeah, knowledge is power, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah. But
cool.
I look forward to let you know when the book is out.
Please do. Yeah, thanks so much.
Yes.